The history of Jews in Great Britain has been long and varied. Jewish communities initially formed in England after the Norman Conquest in 1066, but they were still subject to anti-Semitic attacks, including the York Pogrom in 1190, one of the worst pogroms of the Middle Ages. In 1290, King Edward I expelled Jews from England, and they were not permitted to return until the Lord Protectorate of Oliver Cromwell in 1656. In 1753, the government attempted to sponsor legislation that would have made it easier for foreign-born Jews to become naturalized British citizens. However, riots soon broke out against the so-called Jew Bill, and the act was quickly repealed. Jews rose to great significance in Great Britain during the Napoleonic Wars, when banking families such as the Rothschilds became critical financiers for the war against Napoleon and France. In 1835, Jews were finally granted the right to vote in parliamentary elections. However, at that point in time, they could only hold positions if they agreed to swear their oath of office on the true faith of a Christian, which was done by converted Jew Benjamin Disraeli, who went on to become an important political leader in the country. During the last 20 years of the 19th century, immigration into the country increased from Russia and from Poland, greatly changing the demographics of Britain's Jewish community. As the 20th century turned, there was an uneasy tension between Zionism and anti-Semitism, as the Balfour Declaration was issued by British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour and promised a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Meanwhile, anti-Semitism was also on the rise as a result of the Russian Revolution and general unrest after World War I.
As you heard, treatment of Jews before World War II was constantly fluctuating. Similarly, treatment of Jews directly before and during the war evolved. Right after Hitler rose to power in 1933, there was a wave of thousands of Jewish and even non-Jewish refugees fleeing to England. This is due in part to the long-standing tradition of admitting asylum seekers. The Immigration Law of 1919 hinders the Jewish refugees from receiving any sort of aid or special status. It was during this time that the British public was generally sympathetic of those who were fleeing the anti-Semitism of Nazi Germany. The pre-existing Jews of Britain helped to establish refugee aid organizations. These organizations promised to provide financial support for all incoming refugees. This actually successfully continued until the end of 1939. Thousands of Jewish refugees without money or homes were helped by these organizations. After Kristallnacht in 1938, British pro-refugee groups pressured the government to alter their laws in order to better assist those who were immigrating to Britain. From 1938 to 1939, trains known as Kindertransport helped evacuate 10,000 unaccompanied Jewish children from Germany to Britain, where they were transferred to foster care. After the Anschluss of Austria, on the 12th of March 1938, Britain introduced a visa requirement to prevent an influx of other refugees. Although at this time there was no quota for the number of refugees Britain would take in, there were only 4 types of migrants that were granted immediate entry: transit migrants, children and under 18s, migrants aged between 16 and 35, and over 60s. For those who were fortunate to have made it to Britain before its doors closed, life was not easy. With Germany succeeding at the beginning of the war, there was a sense of panic throughout England. Because of this fear, anyone with a German accent was suspected of being a spy, resulting in the imprisonment of approximately 30,000 Germans in an internment camp within Britain's borders. This included Jewish refugees as well as pro-Nazi Germans. There were even some 8,000 deported to Australia and Canada. As the threat of invasion ebbed, the prisoners were released and some deportees returned to Britain. By the end of the Second World War, many Jewish people who had migrated to Britain chose to permanently remain in the country, gaining citizenship and establishing more permanent Jewish communities.
After the Second World War, England played a large role in forming global Jewish identity. For Jews that survived the Holocaust, while some chose to stay or move to different areas of Europe, some did not feel that staying in Europe was the best option at all. So some fled to places like the United States and other parts around the globe. For centuries, the idea of forming a Jewish state was highly debated amongst the Jews of Europe, in particular in England, with things such as the Balfour Agreement coming to light in the early 20th century after the First World War. For the most part, many Jews or Zionists believed that settling in the area that was known as Palestine then, and which is now the Palestinian and Israeli areas, was the best option for a new colonization in sorts. The only problem that the Zionists faced that the land that they wished to settle in was controlled by the British Empire, and they had no desire of letting it up despite signing an agreement years earlier. And they went to extreme lengths to keep this territory, even going to lengths of sabotaging ships and ordering airstrikes on convoys of refugees fleeing to the area. Perhaps the two largest developments in terms of gross population in the 20th century that boosted the Jewish population of the United Kingdom was in 1973, when Britain formally agreed to join the European Union and allowed open borders for immigrants, workers, and currency, and as well as in the winter of 1991 and the fall of the Soviet Union and organized communism in Eastern Europe, millions of refugees were sent around the world, many of them Jewish, wishing to escape the persecution that had plagued them since the Middle Ages in that area. And so many came to the United Kingdom, not just Jews, in hopes of finding good practice and good labor, but for the most part they enjoyed joining the British working class identity that had been formed. So factory workers, not many people joining the upper elite classes, but there were still plenty of prominent Jewish figures in the United Kingdom during the 20th century and even today in the 21st century.
There are many famous British Jews in the post-war era. Jonathan Sacks, for example, was the chief rabbi of the United Hebrew Congregations of the Commonwealth from 1991 to 2013, and has won a long list of awards for contributions to Jewish life and to the Jewish diaspora. These awards include the 1995 Jerusalem Prize, the Guardian of Zion Award, the Canterbury Medal, and the Katz Award in 2014. He was knighted by the Queen in 2005 and made a life peer, joining the House of Lords in October 2009. Two more famous British Jews, however, feature their religion less prominently. Sacha Baron Cohen, famous for playing anti-Semitic characters, has been quoted saying, "I wouldn't say I'm a religious Jew. I am proud of my Jewish identity, and there are certain things I do and customs I keep." Amy Winehouse wore a Star of David during many performances, but states that being Jewish to me is about being together as a real family. It's not about lighting candles. Although she is not active in the Jewish community, she was represented as such in an exhibit on herself in the British Jewish Museum, which has since been transferred to a similar museum in Australia.
Complications of Jews living in England can also be seen in current day and in England's future. Numerous news articles and sources I found suggest that within the 21st century, 1/4 of the Jewish population are considering leaving England. One source logs 1,382 hate incidents and a 34% rise in violent assaults against Jewish people living in England today. Another statistic I found shows that more than 100 hate crimes and attacks on Jews has been in northern London and from Arabs living there. The Labour Party in England has also been criticizing Israeli policies and is seen as being anti-Semitic. Our group also had the opportunity to interview a British history student named Emma and her thoughts on Jews living in England. The first question I asked was if Jews feel safe in England. She responded by saying, "Yes, I think they feel safe. Where I live in London, there are lots of Jewish communities as well as Islamic communities. I think many of the larger cities in England are proud of the multicultural and diverse society. The main religious tensions I see are against Islamic communities." The next question I asked Emma was, "Have you seen any recent attacks against Jews?" She responded by saying, "The majority of the terrorist attacks and stabbings have been in the name of the Islamic State." Lastly, I asked Emma if she sees a future for Jews in England. She responded by saying, "I see England as a place that welcomes many different religions and ethnicities. I see England as having a future for Jews and Jews being able to make their way up and holding authoritative positions. For example, we currently have the first Muslim mayor of London, who, if you follow him on social media, he speaks heavily about the integration of communities and how we as a city are proud to be so multicultural." The question of whether or not Jews belong in England and what the future holds for Jews continues today.